The exchange floor of Meridian 9 smelled like ozone and old resin, the way it always did when the station's air scrubbers fell a day behind schedule. Eilith Sand stood at the counter with her claim documents pressed flat against her chest, trying to look like someone who belonged there. She did not belong there. Around her, holographic profiles turned slowly in the air, showing off the station's finest contractors. A pair of armored twins with reinforced exoskeletons. A silent augmented tracker who could apparently smell fear through 3 layers of alloy plating. A squad of 6 who moved as one organism, because that was exactly what they were. Every single one of them cost more than Eilith's entire quarterly stipend. She had none of that. She had a claim to a small asteroid called Talvex 2, a deposit of raw varium buried under its crust, and a meeting tomorrow with a man who wanted to take all 3 away from her. "You're back," said the clerk, without looking up from his console. Petrus Lunn had a voice like a joint that needed oil, and an expression that suggested he found most of existence faintly tiring. "I already told you yesterday, broke a san. Nobody on this tier will take a job that pays what you're offering." "Then show me a lower tier." Petrus finally looked at her. His antennae twitched. The closest Akesh came to raising an eyebrow. "There isn't a lower tier. There's a barrel, and you're asking me to scrape the bottom of it." "Scrape it." He sighed and tapped his console. A new column of profiles opened, and Eilith understood immediately why they were kept separate from the rest. These weren't professionals. These were men and women who had washed out of everything else, retired enforcers with drinking problems, ex-soldiers who couldn't hold a weapon steady anymore, one entry that simply read unreliable, do not rebook in Concord shorthand. Petrus scrolled to the very bottom of the list, where a single profile sat blinking in a dull, unflattering amber. "Silas Renner," he read aloud, in the tone of a man reciting a eulogy for someone he'd never liked. "Human. 58 years standard. Left femur shattered and reset badly. Extensive shrapnel scarring. Chronic limp. Flagged for insubordination on 3 prior contracts." He looked up at her. "He's been sitting in a holding pen for 4 months, broke a san. Nobody wants him. Frankly, I'm not sure why we still list him." "How much?" Petrus quoted a number. It was almost insultingly small. "I'll take him." "You understand what you're buying," Petrus said, and for the first time there was something almost like pity in his mandibles. "A guard who can't run. A guard whose leg gives out in bad weather. You're walking into a room with Voron Cade tomorrow, and you want to bring that through the door." He shook his head slowly. In Hive Alkev they'd have retired someone in his condition years ago. Kindly, of course. It's the humane thing to do, when a body stops being useful. I don't understand why humans let theirs limp around collecting a paycheck instead. Eilith didn't answer that. She had grown up around enough Kesh elders to know exactly what retired meant when it was said that gently, and she had never learned to be comfortable with it. "Just get him," she said. "Please." Underscore 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 underscore. 10 minutes later, she stood in the dim waiting bay of Sector G and watched a man walk through the blast doors like he'd rather be anywhere else. Silas Renner did not look like a bodyguard. He looked like a man who had survived something enormous and never quite finished paying for it. He wore a faded grey work jacket, scuffed boots, and he carried the kind of limp that made every third step land a little too hard on his left side. His hair was cropped close and gone entirely grey at the temples. A thin white scar ran from his jaw down into his collar. His eyes were the strange part. Pale, washed out, and utterly still, not angry, not tired, not anything Eilith had a word for. Just quiet, the way an empty corridor is quiet. "You're San," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am." She held out a hand out of habit, then remembered he was human and probably didn't know what to do with a Kesh handshake anyway. He looked at it, then at her, then let it drop without comment. 3 days, he said. No offensive operations. I stand where you tell me to stand. I watch the door. I keep you breathing. That's the whole job. That's the whole job, Eilith agreed, feeling something in her stomach sink lower with every word. What had she done? She had 4 months of desperation and half a paycheck, and this was what it had bought her. "We have a meeting tomorrow," she said, "with Director Voron Cade of the Obsidian Concord. He wants my family's claim on Talvex too. It's going to be tense. Something flickered behind his eyes at the name Cade, there and gone before she could name it. Let's go, he said. We are wasting light. As they walked out through the exchange floor, one of the augmented enforcers, a mountain of chitin and cabling named Graf, stepped deliberately into their path and let his shadow fall over the old man. Careful, relic, Graf said, in the low buzzing register the Kesh used when they meant to be heard by everyone nearby. Don't shatter the other leg before you cash your fee. Silas didn't stop walking. He didn't even turn his head. He simply adjusted his path half a step to the left, close enough that Graf had to step back or be walked into, and kept moving at exactly the same pace as before. Eilith hurried to keep up, her hearts, both of them, hammering against her thorax. She had walked into that exchange looking for protection, and she had walked out with an old, broken man and a rising, nameless dread that she had made an enormous mistake. The transit pod hummed along its rail toward the Concorde's private docking spire, cutting through Meridian 9's lower ring where the light always had a faint grey cast from the recycled atmosphere. Eilith spent the ride reviewing her claim documents for the fourth time, as if reading them again might change what was written on them. Silas sat across from her, eyes closed, apparently asleep. He hadn't asked for a security briefing. He hadn't reviewed the spire's floor plan she'd offered him. He hadn't even checked whether he was carrying a weapon, which, as far as she could tell, he wasn't. Aren't you going to prepare? She finally asked. I am prepared. You haven't looked at anything. I looked at the exits when we boarded. I looked at the cameras in the docking bay. I looked at the two men behind us who've been riding this line for 6 stops longer than their tickets say they should. He opened one eye. I don't need a floor plan to know where the doors are, broke Hassan. I need to know where the people are. She didn't have anything to say to that, so she went back to her documents, though she found herself glancing at the reflection in the pod's window and noticing, for the first time, that 2 Kesh in plain grey coveralls really had been sitting 3 rows back since the first stop. At the transfer platform, the crowd thickened into the kind of press where shoulders and carapaces bumped without apology. One of the grey coveralled Kesh drifted toward them, close enough that it was clearly not an accident, close enough to put himself between Eilith and the exit. Silas moved without seeming to hurry. He simply stepped sideways, planting himself in the narrow gap, so that the Kesh in grey would have had to physically shove past an old man to reach her. He didn't say anything. He didn't posture. He just looked at the Kesh with those pale, still eyes and waited. The Kesh in grey held his ground for exactly 2 seconds, found nothing in that stare worth the trouble, and drifted back into the crowd. Eilith let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Concorde scouts, Silas said quietly, once they were moving again. Checking what kind of guard you brought. Word travels fast on a station this size. How do you know that's what they were? Because if they wanted to hurt you, they'd have done it in the crowd, not walked away from an easy angle. He shrugged, the motion pulling faintly at his bad leg. Cade's people wanted a look at me before tomorrow. Now they've had one. And what did they see? He almost smiled. It didn't reach the rest of his face. An old man with a limp. Exactly what they expected. They rode the rest of the way to the spire in silence, and Eilith found herself thinking, uneasily, that Silas Renner said things like exactly what they expected the way other people said don't worry about it, as if the words were meant to be comforting, and somehow weren't. The spire rose ahead of them out of the grey haze, a black glass needle bristling with Concorde banners, and somewhere behind its mirrored windows, Director Voran Cade was already waiting. The spire. Cade's office occupied the entire top floor of the spire, a vast chamber of black stone and floor-to-ceiling viewports that looked out over half the docking ring. He didn't stand when Eilith entered. He simply gestured to the single empty chair across an obsidian table, already occupied on his side by 4 Concorde enforcers in full battle plate. Broker San, Cade said, his mandibles clicking in what passed, among the Kesh, for a pleasant smile. Sit. Let's not waste each other's afternoon. I'm offering 15% of assessed value for the Talvex 2 claim. Sign here, and you walk out with your life and a modest sum. Everyone wins. The deposit is worth 10 times that, Eilith said, forcing her voice level. My family has held that charter for 3 generations. Cade's smile didn't waver. 3 generations of a claim you can't defend is worth exactly what I say it's worth. His compound eyes flicked toward the corner of the room, where Silas stood, quiet and unremarkable, near a display of Concord trophies. "Is this your protection?" A relic with a limp. A dry, rattling laugh. "Grath, tell me, should I be afraid?" Grath, standing nearest the door, rolled his augmented shoulders and grinned with too many teeth. "I could throw him through the viewport, Director. Might improve the view." "Not yet," Cade said, turning his attention back to Eilith, his tone sliding from amusement into something colder. "Broker San, you are in my station, breathing my air, sitting at my table. You will sign, or Grath will make certain your journey home is a great deal shorter than you'd like." "I need time," Eilith said, gathering her documents, her legs already moving her towards standing. She had to get out. She had to find another way. "You don't get time," Cade snapped, all civility gone now. He nodded to Grath. "Take the documents. If she resists, break something small first, so she understands we are being generous." Grath crossed the room in 3 long strides and reached for Eilith's arm. "Excuse me," said a quiet, unhurried voice. Grath paused, turning his head toward the old man by the trophy case. Silas hadn't moved from his spot on the wall, but his pale eyes were now locked entirely onto the enforcer, and something in the set of his shoulders had changed in a way Eilith couldn't quite name. "She's leaving," Silas said. "You're going to let her walk out that door." The room went still. Then Cade laughed, and Grath rolled his neck with an audible crack of servos. "Old man," Grath said, "I'm going to peel you out of that jacket and use it as a rag." He lunged. He was fast. Augmented reflexes gave him a burst of speed no organic body should manage, closing the distance in a fraction of a second, his massive fist already swinging in a lethal arc towards Silas's skull. Silas didn't block it and didn't retreat. He stepped inside the swing, close enough that the blow had no room to build force, his bad leg planting itself with a sudden, terrifying stability. His palm shot up and struck the joint at the base of Grath's reinforced arm, right where cable met carapace. There was a sharp, ugly snap of overloading servos, and Grath's arm went dead at his side. Before the enforcer could recover, Silas had already pivoted, catching him by the collar of his armor and using his own forward momentum to drive him face first into the obsidian table. The table cracked under the impact. Grath did not get up. It had taken perhaps 2 seconds. The remaining 3 enforcers froze, weapons half raised, staring at their downed leader. Silas straightened, brushed a fleck of shattered stone from his sleeve, and looked at none of them. He looked only at Cade. "The lady is leaving," he said again, in exactly the same tone as before. Cade had gone very still, his mandibles clicking with no sound at all, his compound eyes fixed on the ruin of his own table. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost every trace of its earlier warmth. "You'll regret that," he said. "Both of you. This isn't finished." Silas took Eilith's elbow, gently, and guided her toward the door. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The undercity. They didn't return to Eilith's quarters. Silas had the transport driver drop them instead into the industrial undercity, a sprawl of maintenance corridors and disused refinery shafts that ran beneath Meridian 9's public levels like a second, forgotten station. He moved through it with the ease of a man who had memorized 100 places just like it, eventually leading her down through a service hatch into a storm shelter that smelled of coolant and rust. "Sit," he said, tossing her a flask of stale water. "Don't connect to the open station network. Cade owns half the relay towers on this ring. He'll trace your signal in minutes." Eilith sat on an overturned crate, her mind still replaying the sound of the table cracking under Grath's skull. "You told the exchange you had no combat capability," she said. "You told them you were disabled." "I am disabled." He rubbed absently at his bad knee. "Flares up whenever the station's climate control cycle's cold. And I didn't run an offensive operation. I defended my client. It's in the contract." "Don't do that," she said, sharper than she meant to. "Don't hide behind the wording. That was Grath. He's killed 6 men in bar disputes this cycle alone. You dropped him in under 3 seconds." Silas didn't answer. He was already crouched beside a loose floor panel, working it free with a small pry bar, revealing a long canvas case hidden beneath the deck plating. He unzipped it to show a compact but serious collection of gear, a folded rifle, breaching charges, a set of relay jamming emitters, a combat knife with a worn leather grip. "Who are you?" Eilith said quietly, "that you have a cache hidden under a maintenance deck on a station you've never worked before?" "Old habit," Silas said. You learn to stash things in places like this if you've done this long enough. She didn't get anything more out of him after that. He set to work checking his gear with the same flat, unhurried focus he'd shown in Cade's office, and Eilith realized she wasn't going to get her answers from conversation. She reached into her coat instead and pulled out her handheld terminal. She couldn't reach the open network, but she still had an old hardline uplink to a university contact back on the Ridgeline colonies, an information broker named Doran Vey who owed her more favors than either of them had bothered to count. Doran, she typed, I need a deep background trace. Name, Silas Renner, mid-50s, human, registered mercenary ID out of Meridian 9. Something's wrong with the public file. Dig past it. The reply took 11 minutes, and when it came, it arrived wrapped in 3 separate warning banners. Eilith, wherein every dead star are you. That public profile is a fabrication. Somebody built it to hide something bigger. I had to root through 2 black market relays just to touch the real record. His name isn't Renner. Sending you the file now. Don't ask me how I got it. The Ashwood file. The record opened on her screen, most of it blacked out in heavy redaction bars, but what remained told her enough. His real name was Silas Vance. Rank, Commander. Division, the Ashwood Directive, a deep deployment coalition unit whose records were sealed under classifications Eilith had never heard of. Call sign, Warden. 20 years ago, during a siege on a remote frontier moon, 3 coalition companies had been pinned down by a hostile force with no way out and no relief coming. The coalition had sent in a single Ashwood operative to break the encirclement from the inside. He had spent 38 days behind enemy lines. He had dismantled their command network, sabotaged their defense grid, and ended the siege alone. The record noted, almost as an afterthought, that he had sustained catastrophic injuries in the first 4 days of that operation and had continued the mission anyway for the following 34. The coalition discharged him 10 years later, citing chronic injury and unfitness for further service. That was the part that didn't sit right. Eilith read it 3 times before she understood why. They didn't discharge you because you were broken, she said slowly, looking up at him. They discharged you because you weren't. Because you kept going after an injury that should have ended you, and it broke something in how they understood what a soldier is supposed to survive. Silas had stopped checking his gear. He was very still, watching her with those pale, unreadable eyes. A commander who doesn't stop when he's supposed to stop, he said quietly, is a problem for people who plan wars around the assumption that damage has a limit. I made the math wrong. So they put me somewhere I couldn't make it wrong again. And you let them. I didn't want to be a lesson, he said. I wanted to be left alone. He went back to his gear, closing the case with a soft click. That's not on the table anymore, is it? Above them, faint through the deck plating, came the low rhythmic thrum of drop shuttles. Many of them. Eilith's terminal buzzed with an unencrypted broadcast, blasting on every open channel in the sector. Cade's voice, stripped of all its earlier civility. Broker San. You brought something ugly into my station and it embarrassed me in front of my own guard. I have 40 enforcers sealing the undercity right now. We have thermal grids and full hive relay coordination. I am going to bring this entire sector down around you until I hear you scream. Eilith looked at Silas in raw panic. 40. We can't survive 40. Silas rose, slinging the canvas case over one shoulder, and for the first time since she'd met him, something in his posture had changed completely. The tired stoop was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt less like an old man resting and more like a held breath. You're right, he said. You can't. He moved toward the ladder leading up to the maintenance level. Stay in this shelter. Keep the hatch sealed. Whatever you hear, don't open it until I come back for you. What are you going to do? He paused at the ladder, looking back at her with something that was almost, briefly, warm. I'm going to earn my fee, he said, and climbed up into the dark. What the dark remembers. The heavy hatch sealed above Eilith with a ringing clang, and she was alone in the amber emergency light of the shelter. She didn't waste the silence. Her fingers moved across a terminal, bypassing the local firewall and pulling live feeds from the undercity's maintenance cameras, then splicing into Cade's unencrypted mercenary channel. 40 enforcers moved through the lower corridors in disciplined formation, augmented plating gleaming under the flickering service lights, hive relay emitters mounted on their shoulders keeping every unit synced to a shared pheromone data stream. the same coordination network that let Kesh forces move and think almost as a single organism. Thermal returns show heat pooling near maintenance shaft 9, came the voice of Cade's field commander, a scarred veteran named Vect Orin. Flush him toward the open bay. I want him alive enough for the director to make an example of. Ilith searched the feeds for Silas and found nothing. The corridors near shaft 9 were empty. Then, one by one, the relay towers along the eastern maintenance line went dark. Report. Orin snapped over the channel. Who's cutting our relays? Nobody's touched the towers, sir, came a nervous reply. The signal's just gone. What none of them understood yet, watching their coordination grid flicker and drop, was that Silas hadn't attacked the towers at all. He had found the pheromone emitters mounted along the corridor junctions, small relay nodes that kept the hive-linked enforcers synchronized, and quietly disabled 6 of them in the dark, cutting entire squads off from a shared awareness they depended on to move as one. 4 Kesh soldiers raised on hive coordination. Fighting without that signal wasn't just difficult. It was disorienting in a way none of their training accounted for. A squad of 5, suddenly deaf to their own network, swept a narrow storage corridor with weapons raised, calling coordinates to each other manually for the first time in their careers. High above them on a maintenance gantry, wrapped in shadow, Silas dropped a single fragmentation charge into the center of their formation and was gone before the blast finished rolling down the corridor. Contact, Storage Corridor 4, Orin barked. All units converge, lay down suppressive fire. They converged on an empty room. Silas was already 2 levels away, moving through a service duct with the same unhurried, deliberate pace he'd used crossing Cade's office, disabling a second relay node with a small tool from his jacket as he passed. A 4-man patrol, cut off from a shared signal and reduced to shouting coordinates over open air, walked directly into him in a darkened junction. There was no warning shot, no announcement. He was simply among them, moving with a fluid economy that turned every strike into the next one's setup, and in a handful of seconds 3 were down and the 4th was fleeing, screaming a warning that would never reach the rest. Back in Cade's command post, the director's voice cracked with fury over the open channel. 40 men. Orin. How is one broken human doing this to 40 men? He's not fighting like a person, sir, Orin answered, and for the first time there was real fear under his composure. He's fighting like he already knows how this ends. By the time Vect Orin managed to pull his remaining 18 enforcers into a tight defensive ring around Cade's armored command shelter, more than half the original force was gone, and the rest had stopped pretending this was a hunt. Hold the perimeter, Orin ordered, his voice unsteady now. He cannot take all of us at once. Hold the line and wait for reinforcements. The undercity had gone silent except for the hum of failing relay towers and the distant drip of condensation from the refinery pipes above. Then, out of the dark, a single set of uneven footsteps echoed against the deck plating. Silas walked into the weak light of the shelter's floodlamps without any attempt at concealment. His jacket was torn, his face streaked with soot, his limp more pronounced than ever, his bad leg dragging faintly with every other step. He looked exhausted. He looked old. His eyes were burning. Fire! Orin screamed. All units, fire! 18 weapons swung toward him. Before a single trigger closed, Silas reached into his jacket and pressed a small detonator switch. During his silent passage through the undercity, he hadn't only been disabling relay towers. He had been placing charges along the support struts of a decommissioned refinery tank suspended directly above Orin's defensive position. The explosions came in a tight, synchronized sequence. The tank's corroded legs buckled with a groan of failing steel, and several tons of scrap and machinery came down on the enforcer's perimeter in a single collapsing wave. The impact shook the deck plating hard enough that Ilith, sealed in her shelter 2 levels below, felt the shockwave rattle dust from a ceiling. When the dust began to clear, the shelter's exterior camera, battered but still functioning, showed the defensive ring gone, buried under twisted girders, Orin and most of his remaining force down or trapped beneath the wreckage. Through the settling haze, Silas walked forward, his limp dragging heavier now, straight toward the armored door of Cade's shelter. He set a small breaching charge against the locking mechanism. It blew the door clean off its hinges. Inside, Cade was on the floor, thrown against a console during the collapse, a gash bleeding above one compound eye. He scrambled backward, his composure entirely gone, and drew a small holdout blaster from a hidden holster. "Stay back," Cade hissed, the weapon shaking in his grip. "I have credit accounts on 4 systems. Name your price." Silas didn't look at the blaster. He looked at Cade the way a person looks at something small and already finished. Cade fired. The shot went wide, scorching the doorframe beside Silas's head. He didn't flinch. He crossed the distance in 2 steps, knocked the weapon from Cade's grip, and hauled him up by the collar of his ruined coat, pinning him against the bulkhead. "You people cull your own for less than this," Silas said quietly, his voice barely audible over Cade's ragged breathing. "A cracked shell, a bad leg, and you decide someone's finished. That's the mistake. Damage isn't the end of the story. It's just where the story gets interesting." "Please," Cade choked out. "What are you?" "I'm the thing your doctrine doesn't have a category for," Silas said, and set him down, hard, on the deck. He pulled a data slate from his jacket, the formal renunciation document Ilith had drafted in the shelter below, and pressed it into Cade's shaking hands. "You're going to renounce every claim your Concord has on Talvex too," Silas said, "publicly, under trade authority seal, before the hour is out. And you're never going near Broker San again. Not her ledger. Not her name. Not her shadow." Cade looked at the wreckage of his command post, at the bodies of 18 elite enforcers scattered through the undercity, and understood, with a cold and total certainty, that the man standing over him was not a mercenary he had underpaid. He signed. By the time Ilith finally worked up the nerve to unseal the shelter hatch, the fighting had gone quiet and the undercity's emergency lights had settled into their slow amber cycle. She found Silas sitting on an overturned crate near the collapsed refinery tank, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette he must have kept somewhere in that battered jacket, his bad leg stretched out in front of him. "You're bleeding," she said, running toward him. "Not mine," he said. "Mostly." He handed her the signed renunciation, sealed under Concord Trade Authority, along with a formal record ending every claim Cade's people had ever made on Talvex II. "It's done," he said. "Your family's claim is clear. Cade won't be a problem again, not for you, and not for anyone who asks around about what happened down here tonight." Ilith held the data slate with both hands, feeling something in her chest loosen for the first time in days. "You saved my family's legacy," she said. 3 generations. I don't know how to repay something like that." "You already agreed on a number," Silas said, allowing himself the smallest, tiredest smile she'd seen on him yet. 3 days' fee. That was the whole contract. "That's absurd. You could ask for anything." "I don't want anything," he said, pushing himself up off the crate, wincing as he put weight back on his bad leg. "I want the quiet back. Money just complicates that." He glanced at his jacket sleeve, torn clean through at the shoulder. "Though if you know a decent tailor on this ring, I wouldn't say no to that favor." Ilith laughed, a strange, wet, disbelieving sound, half relief and half something she didn't have a name for yet. They made their way back up through the undercity in silence, and when they finally reached the exchange floor of Meridian 9, Petrus Lunn looked up from his console with an expression Ilith had never once seen on his face before. He didn't say anything about relics. He didn't mention limps, or bottom tiers, or the humane thing to do when a body stopped being useful. He simply processed Silas Renner's final payment without comment, his antennae very still, and watched the old man limp away toward the transit line with something that looked, for the first time, uncomfortably close to respect. Word would travel through Meridian 9 in the days that followed. Quiet, half-believed rumors about the broker who hired the cheapest guard on the exchange, and the 40 enforcers who never made it home. The Kesh who heard it would tell it as a curiosity, an anomaly, a strange story from a strange species. But somewhere in the telling, a small and uncomfortable question would take root that no hive doctrine had ever needed to answer before. What if the ones who broke, and kept going anyway, weren't the weak ones at all? What if they were the ones worth fearing most?